In the village of Nteka, Neca and her husband, Okafor, had been married for over a decade. The compound echoed with the laughter of children, but they were all girls. 7 beautiful daughters, each with bright eyes and eager smiles, ran about their yard. To Neca, they were her treasure. But to Okafor, they were a daily reminder of what he thought was missing, a son to carry his name. The whispers had started years ago, first from the elders, then from his own friends. Okafor, a man without a son is like a tree without roots, they would say. He laughed it off at first, but their words took root in his mind. At night, Neca would see him sitting alone, his eyes clouded with thought. She prayed he would see the value of the daughters God had given them, but each day, the distance between them grew. Okafor's family became restless. His elder brother called him aside during a festival and said, "You have wasted your years, brother. A man's pride is in his son. Neca has failed you." The words burned into Okafor's heart like hot coals. He began spending less time at home, returning late, avoiding Neca's gaze. Neca felt the change in him. The warmth they once shared was gone, replaced by cold silences. At night, she cried quietly, so her daughters wouldn't see her tears. She worked harder in the farm, hoping her effort would remind him of her worth, but his heart seemed to be drifting far away. The daughters, sensing the tension, stayed close to their mother, helping with chores and trying to make her smile. One evening, after the yam harvest, Okafor returned home and asked Neca to sit down. His voice was flat, his eyes hard. "I have made a decision," he said. "I will take another wife. I need a son to continue my name." The words sliced through Neca like a sharp blade. She sat frozen, her mind struggling to understand the man before her. "Okafor, after all these years," she whispered. But he did not answer. The next morning, he gathered his clothes and left, leaving behind his wife and their 7 daughters. The neighbors whispered as he walked past, but he didn't care. Neca stood in the doorway, her heart shattering, as her youngest child clung to her wrapper, asking why Papa was leaving. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Neca had no one to lean on but her children and God. She decided that if Okafor had abandoned them, she would not abandon herself or her daughters. "We will survive," she told them one evening, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. She began to sell palm oil and groundnuts in the market, waking before sunrise to prepare her goods. Her hands grew rough, her back ached, but she pressed on. Some mocked her, calling her the woman without a son, but she ignored them. In her heart, she carried a quiet fire, a determination to prove that a daughter could be as much a blessing as any son. The market became Neca's battlefield. Every day, she carried baskets of palm oil, yams, and groundnuts on her head, her daughters trailing behind with smaller loads. The sun burned her skin, but she pressed on, knowing that every coin she made meant food for her children. Still, the gossip never stopped. Women in bright wrappers would glance her way and whisper, "That's Neca, the one Okafor left because she couldn't give him a son." Some would smirk, others would shake their heads. Neca learned to keep her eyes fixed on her goods and her heart fixed on her goal, to see her daughters stand tall one day. At night, she prayed over each child, asking God to bless the work of their hands. With little money, sending her daughters to school was almost impossible. But Neca believed that knowledge was the seed of change. She saved every extra coin and bought second-hand textbooks. Under the moonlight, she would gather her girls and teach them to read and write using a piece of charcoal on a wooden slate. Her eldest, Adiz, quickly became the leader among her sisters, helping the younger ones with their lessons. Though their uniforms were faded and their sandals worn thin, the girls walked to school each morning with pride. They understood their mother's sacrifice and wanted to make her proud. Neca often reminded them, "Your father left because he couldn't see your value. One day, the world will." Meanwhile, Okafor had brought his new wife, Ifema, into the compound. The village watched with curiosity, expecting her to quickly bear him a son. Okafor walked with his head high, convinced that his new marriage would erase the shame he felt. But months turned into years, and Ifema did not conceive. The same people who had once mocked Neca began whispering about Ifema. Some said she was cursed, others claimed Okafor's desire for a son had offended the gods. Okafor began to avoid gatherings again, his earlier pride replaced by quiet frustration. Back in Neca's household, the struggles were many. There were days when food was scarce, and the children went to bed hungry. Neca would pretend she had already eaten, giving her portion to her daughters. Yet, she never allowed despair to take root. She reminded them, hunger will not last forever if we work with our hands. The girls began helping her in small ways, braiding hair for neighbors, fetching water for a fee, and selling handmade beads. Slowly, the family began to earn more, and the girls learned the dignity of hard work. Neca's heart swelled with quiet pride, even as her own body grew thin from sacrifice. Adiz, the eldest, had a gift for drawing. She would sketch faces in the dust with a stick, capturing every detail. One day, a visiting school inspector noticed her work and asked who had taught her. When he learned she was self-taught, he offered her a scholarship to study art in the city. It was a bittersweet moment. Neca was proud but afraid. The city was far, and she would miss her firstborn. Adiz knelt before her mother and said, "Mama, I will not waste this chance. I will make a way for all of us." Her words lit a spark of hope in the hearts of her sisters. Adiz's move to the city brought tears and joy. The bus ride felt endless, and Neca held her tightly before letting go. In the city, Adiz worked tirelessly, balancing her studies with part-time jobs. She sent small amounts of money home, which helped keep her sisters in school. Whenever she returned to visit, she brought gifts, books, shoes, and clothes. The younger girls looked at her with admiration, realizing that their mother's dream of a better life was not just a dream anymore. Even the villagers began to speak differently about Neca's children. The other daughters began to follow Adiz's example. Chinelo, the second-born, had a talent for sewing. She started making dresses from old cloth scraps, which she sold at the market. Her work caught the eye of a trader who promised to connect her with buyers in the city. One by one, the girls found their strengths. Onioni, the third daughter, was brilliant in mathematics and began tutoring children for a small fee. Each coin they earned was handed to their mother without question. Neca, who once feared how she would feed them, now saw her daughters slowly lifting the weight off her shoulders. Okafor's home, however, remained childless. Ifema, his second wife, grew tired of the whispers and cold glances from neighbors. She avoided the market and kept to herself. Okafor, once proud and confident, now walked with his eyes downcast. Whenever he saw Neca's daughters in the village, dressed neatly and speaking confidently, a strange feeling settled in his chest, part regret, part shame. But his pride would not let him admit it. Instead, he told himself that a man's worth was still tied to a son, even if his life told him otherwise. One morning, a wealthy woman from the city visited the market and noticed Chinelo's dresses. She placed a huge order for 20 pieces, promising to pay handsomely. Chinelo rushed home, her heart pounding. It was more work than she had ever done at once, but with the help of her sisters, she finished on time. The payment was enough to buy new sewing machines and better fabric. For the first time, Neca allowed herself to dream of building a real shop. She looked at her daughters and thought, "My enemies will not laugh forever." Onioni's tutoring business grew so much that even the headmaster took notice. He nominated her for a scholarship program in the state capital. Just like Adiz, she was offered a place in one of the best schools. When Onioni left for the capital, Neca's heart ached with pride. She remembered the nights they studied by lantern light, the sound of Onioni's soft voice reciting multiplication tables. Now, that same voice would carry her far beyond the boundaries of Ntege. At the annual New Yam festival, Neca's daughters wore dresses Chinelo had made. They stood tall, their heads high, their smiles warm. Villagers whispered in admiration, some even approaching Neca to apologize for past mockery. Okafor watched from a distance, standing beside Ifema. His eyes lingered on his daughters, who laughed and danced without sparing him a glance. A strange pain twisted in his chest, but he quickly turned away when he saw Neca speaking proudly with the village chief. In the city, Adi's art was gaining recognition. She was invited to showcase her work at a prestigious exhibition. Many of her paintings reflected her childhood, a mother's calloused hands, children carrying water, the deep red soil of the village. When a wealthy collector bought one of her pieces for a price she could barely imagine, Adi's cried. She sent a large sum home, instructing her mother to fix the leaking roof and buy herself a proper bed. Neca refused the bed at first, but her daughters insisted. It was time she rested like a queen. Ifema began to feel the full weight of her childlessness. The taunts and whispers grew louder. Women avoided inviting her to naming ceremonies, afraid it would remind her of her emptiness. Her frustrations spilled into her marriage, and arguments with Okafor became frequent. She accused him of still watching Neca from afar. Okafor denied it, but deep down, he could not forget the family he had abandoned. With Adi's financial help, Chinelo opened her own sewing shop in the village. She hired 2 apprentices and began receiving orders from nearby towns. People who had once mocked Neca now came to her for favors, asking if Chinelo could make dresses for weddings and special events. Neca smiled politely, but in her heart, she remembered every word they had said when she was alone and struggling. She thanked God for turning her shame into honor. Onyini won first place in a national mathematics competition. The prize included a cash award and an opportunity to study abroad. Neca could hardly believe it. Her once barefoot daughter was now preparing to travel to another country. The entire village gathered to celebrate. Even those who had doubted Neca's worth came forward to congratulate her. Okafor stayed away from the gathering, unable to face the truth. The daughters he had abandoned were achieving greatness without him. Okafor's fortunes began to decline. His business suffered losses, and with no children to help him, his burdens grew heavier. Ifema, tired of the constant struggles, spent more time at her family's home. One evening, Okafor sat alone in his compound, the silence pressing against him. For the first time, he admitted to himself that he had made a mistake. But he wondered if it was already too late to return. With her daughter's contributions, Neca renovated her home. The once cracked walls were painted, the roof was new, and a small garden bloomed in the yard. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the aroma of good food. Visitors from other villages came to see the famous 7 daughters, and the mother who had raised them alone. Neca welcomed them warmly, her heart full of gratitude. Adiz returned home for the first time in years, now a celebrated artist. She brought gifts for everyone in the village, including the school that had once struggled to provide enough books. At the market, she hugged her mother tightly, tears in her eyes. "Mama, your prayers brought us here," she whispered. Neca could only nod, her throat too tight with emotion to speak. One afternoon, Okafor appeared at Neca's gate. His clothes were worn, his face older than his years. He greeted the daughters awkwardly, but they stood in silence, unsure how to respond. When Neca came out, he lowered his head. "I came to see you, and to say I was wrong." The words were heavy, almost breaking his voice. But Neca simply looked at him and said, "Okafor, the children you abandoned are the same ones God used to lift me up." Ifema eventually left Okafor completely, returning to her family's compound. She told anyone who would listen that she had wasted her best years in a barren marriage. Okafor, now alone, faced the reality he had avoided for so long. He had traded a full home for an empty one. The news of his situation spread quickly, and some pitied him, but many saw it as justice for the pain he had caused Neca. On Neca's 60th birthday, her daughters organized a grand celebration. People came from far and wide to honor the woman who had raised 7 strong, successful women without a husband's support. As music filled the air, Neca sat in a chair draped with fine cloth, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. The laughter and love in that moment erased years of struggle from her heart. Okafor stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the celebration. He saw the joy on Neca's face, the respect she commanded, and the love her daughters poured on her. A deep ache settled in his chest. He thought of the years he had lost, the memories he would never share with them. For the first time, he understood the true meaning of wealth, not land or cattle, but a family's love. During the celebration, each daughter took turns speaking. They told stories of their mother's sacrifices, her strength, and her faith. Tears flowed freely among the guests. Adiz said, "Mama, you are the reason we stand tall today. You taught us that our value is not in what others call us, but in what God sees in us." The crowd erupted in applause, and Neca wept openly. At the end of the speeches, the daughters presented Neca with a new house they had built for her in the heart of the village. It was spacious, beautiful, and filled with everything she could ever need. Neca fell to her knees in gratitude, lifting her hands to the sky. "Lord, you have remembered me," she prayed. That night, Okafor sat alone in his compound, listening to the distant sound of laughter from Neca's home. He realized he was not part of their joy, and that was the price of his pride. He whispered to himself, "I traded gold for dust." But the words were swallowed by the wind, leaving him in silence once more. Years later, Neca's story became a lesson told to young couples in Tehe. People spoke of the woman who raised 7 daughters alone and turned shame into honor. Her daughters continued to prosper, and each one named a child after her. Neca lived to see her grandchildren grow, and when she finally passed away, the entire village mourned her like a queen. Her life was proof that the value of a mother and her children cannot be measured by the absence or presence of a son, but by the love, strength, and legacy they leave behind. The end. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, share. Subscribe for more stories.